Oh, hey there. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to be talking about the most difficult interview questions I've ever been asked and how I went about answering them. I don't know why I'm putting myself through this trauma. I have loads of bad memories associated with these questions, and I'm surprised that when I was asked these questions I didn't cry on the spot. But you know what, let's relive it, let's relive those amazing memories, and let's move on to the first question that I was asked. So the first most difficult question I had was, what makes you happy? And I think one of the reasons why this question threw me off was because it was a question that was asked immediately at the start of an interview. And it was very different to the usual tell me about yourself questions. So how did I go about answering this question? So I did a little mini brainstorm and I came up with a few things that just generally in life made me happy. Some of those things were spending time with family and friends in social settings, reading books, playing the drums, exercising, so that included going to the gym and swimming. So those were the 4 things generally in life that made me happy. However, I didn't just want to go to the interviewer and say, yeah, well, spending time with my friends makes me happy, getting turned on the weekend makes me happy. Like, I wasn't going to say that to the interviewer. It would not create a great impression at all. So how I went about answering it was actually grouping those activities into specific things. So when it came to social settings and spending time with family and friends, that was human interaction. So I said that human interaction was something that made me happy. Being able to unwind, spend time with family and friends, being able to have close friends who you are able to talk to, being able to therefore support others was something that made me happy. And that's also part of my personality. I like helping people out, and in turn I get that fulfillment, and that gives me happiness. In terms of my hobbies, so playing the drums, exercising and reading books, those were all forms of self-improvement for me, and that's what makes me happy, the fact that I am reaching goals that are outside an academic field. So for example, when it comes to the gym, I am obsessed with trying to build my abs, and that makes me really happy when I'm seeing results. So when I was speaking to the interviewer, I said that partaking in forms of self-improvement made me happy. And that in turn leads on to another thing that made me happy, and that's keeping busy. Ensuring that I have goals and motivations and objectives in my life keeps me happy, as well as keeping me motivated, because it goes to show that I am working towards something. So can you see how I turned 4 general kind of hobbies or just interests into things that are actually useful for an interviewer to gain an insight into how I am as a person? So the second question that I found quite difficult was a competency question, and it was, tell us about a time you negatively impacted someone. And I like to think that I'm a good influence. All my friends' parents love me, and you know, my friends think I'm a good influence too. Don't make me out. This is why this question was quite difficult for me, because I didn't want to paint myself in a bad light to the interviewer. I wanted to kind of put my best foot forward. So how did I go about answering the question? So for this question, I went via a personal experience route rather than a work experience route. And I talked about how I'm an elder sister. I have a younger brother who obviously looks up to me and sees me as a role model. So there are times where sometimes, say if I use a certain word, he sometimes copies that word, and I'm like, oh crap, like I shouldn't have said that in the first place. And that was one situation where I negatively impacted my brother. However, I didn't leave my answer at just that. I talked about how I talked to my brother afterwards and said that I shouldn't be using those words and he shouldn't be using those words either, because you know, they don't create a good impression of you as a person. I acknowledged my responsibility as a role model in his life and ensured going forward that I was careful in the things that I said and the things that I did, because ultimately these are things that he may emulate and look up to in the future. So in terms of structuring my answer to this question, I firstly set the scene and talked about the actual negative impact that I did. I then went on to talk about how I went about circumventing the issue, resolving the issue, and ensuring that it never happened again in the future. The fact that I use a personal experience rather than a work experience was something that the interviewer quite liked, because it just goes to show that I'm actually human, and it just really kind of provided that personal touch in the interview. So this last question was one that I saved till last because ultimately it was the most difficult question I've ever been asked in my life, and honestly I don't know how I went about answering it in such a way that I did, but somehow I came out unscathed and it actually led me to getting a training contract at the end of it. I don't know how I did it, but you know, here it goes. So the question was, let me scratch my face first. So the question was, I've forgotten the question. Drumroll please. So this question was, what do you think we're thinking about you right now, positives and negatives? So somehow the interviewer thought I had some mind reading abilities, which, you know, I wish I did have, because I would have saved myself so many red flags if I did, but you know, we move. So how did I go about answering the question? So an initial thought came into my head of how about I play it on the banter side and say, well, positive you're thinking about me right now is that I can be a trainee solicitor in your firm. But you know, I didn't have that significant banter with the interviewer yet. And also I didn't want to portray myself as someone who's quite arrogant and cocky, and that kind of joke can go horribly wrong. Imagine if they didn't laugh or anything, that awkward silence would actually just kill me straight off. So how did I go about answering this question? So I talked about the positives first. So I mentioned that I was someone who was capable to be a trainee solicitor, and I had the relevant skills that showed that I was capable for this role. And then I lent from my experiences to provide examples of how I show that capability. So for example, my paralegal experience. I then also lent from our discussions that we had previously in that same interview. So I talked about the fact that a positive you see in me is my passion for diversity and inclusion, because that is something that we did talk about prior to that question being asked. However, in terms of negatives, I said that I was someone who you felt needed to assure myself more and be more confident in my answers. And the reason why I said this was because in that interview, I felt like I was always being challenged to keep on answering questions in more detail and also answer with a lot more confidence. However, again, I didn't just leave the negative at that place. I said that albeit you may feel like I need to assure myself more and have more confidence within myself, this is something that will improve as I've gained more experience in the legal field, having more exposure to the roles that a trainee will have, and also talking and conversing with more partners and solicitors and associates of different firms will help me in assuring myself and giving me that confidence that you may feel like I'm missing. At the end of that question, I actually flipped it back to the interviewer and I said, okay, so you know, I've provided this self-analysis of myself. Do you think that the answer that I provided was accurate? And she said somewhat yes, and she actually disagreed with my negative. She said that you portray yourself as someone who's actually quite confident in yourself. And I actually feel like even though this was the most difficult question I've ever been asked, it was also the most interesting, and it led to a massive discussion about how we view ourselves and how other people view us. And I think that's why I find the successful interviews are the ones that actually lead into conversation, where the interviewers go off script a bit and just try and find out more about you as a person. This sounds so geeky, but at the end of that interview, I actually really enjoyed the conversation that we had. Even though that question made me want to cry in that moment, it was actually something that I learned a lot from. These were the 3 most difficult questions I've ever been asked in an interview. How would you have answered these questions differently? Comment below or let me know on LinkedIn or Instagram. Thank you for watching my video. As always, subscribe, like, comment, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.